Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, his church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. All right, joining me on today's episode is Isabel, who is born and raised right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And she's been a member of Central Church of Christ all her life, going on 25 years. We were just talking a little bit before the show started. 25 coming up in April. Yeah, quarter
Crazy.
of a century. You are an old lady. She graduated from Lipscomb University in 2022 with a degree in exercise science. And she took a year off and worked full-time at Summit Physical Therapy as a therapy technician.
Mm-hmm.
And so Isabel is now in her second year of grad school at Belmont University, working on her occupational therapy doctorate. And after graduation, she plans to work with pediatrics as an occupational therapist. In Isabel's free time, you enjoy spending time with family and friends, reading, yoga, outdoors, exploring new places, cultures, foods, restaurants, and you like a good cup of coffee.
Oh, yeah.
You can find it.
Mm-hmm.
Isabel, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's good to
Thanks
have you.
for having me.
Yeah,
I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. We had talked a little bit about your sister being here on the show too. That would have been kind of cool.
It would have been cool.
Because I was so going to pitch you guys against each other.
Maybe another time.
maybe so. We can get her to agree to come in here. She probably knew me well enough to know. No, he's setting us up.
Exactly. Not doing it.
Yeah. So, favorite coffee? Do you have a favorite coffee shop?
That's a hard thing. Right now, okay, I love Canopy on Lookout Mountain.
Okay, I'm just so glad you didn't say Starbucks.
No, okay, I love Starbucks. But, it has its place.
Yeah.
But I love local coffee shops.
Yeah.
Canopy's good
Okay.
on Lookout Mountain.
Okay.
Mean Monk's good, But yeah, I love a cappuccino. In the afternoon, I can do flavors,
So you add the stuff to it, like some sugar and spice.
Oh, I don't do
and
any.
Everything nice.
Mm-mm. I don't like much sugar in it.
So just a plain cup of coffee. Are you going to add anything to it?
Splash of milk.
A little bit of milk.
In the morning. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I want.
No
Cappuccino,
sugar.
nothing in it. No sugar.
Okay.
I know, I'm brave.
Okay. Just a little bit of creamer.
Right.
I have a whole theory about coffee drinkers and what they add.
Okay.
Like early in life, when you still have like some zest and zeal for life,
Right.
you're adding stuff,
Like
you're making it
right.
good. The people that just drink it straight black, they've just given up.
I know.
It's just like it's too much of a hassle. Just, inject the caffeine. That's all they're in it for.
It is. I don't know. I feel like this is young to only like the flavor of coffee, but I love it.
Yeah, you're on a pretty fast track trajectory to pure black.
I know.
Scary stuff.
It is.
Yeah.
It's serious.
And you're an outdoor girl, right? You like to be in the outdoors.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your aunt, is it your aunt that's doing the yoga
Yeah,
stuff?
she teaches. Yep.
Did she get you into yoga?
She did. I probably in high school is when I started going.
Okay.
And then like in college and stuff, I'd go at school and in Nashville and I do it on my own. Try to do it every day.
So when I was in high school, we had a new gym teacher, female, which was weird for the day to have a mixed class with a female gym. So she came in and she was a big yoga person. All the guys, man, we were laughing and cracking jokes and it was just like so funny to us. And so she decides she's going to do this yoga class and everybody has to participate. So of course, all the guys are just laughing and stuff. That was the most like painful experience of that was serious stuff.
It's crazy.
I had no idea.
And it's so good for you. Like people make fun of it, but try going to a hot yoga class too. It's intense.
Oh, I was sore for weeks after that.
And it's so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Working areas of the body that you just.
That's what I tell everyone. I'm like, do not knock it till you try it. You have to go.
Yeah.
It's not just stretching.
It's not for sissies either.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, this is going to be So I was very intentional about asking you because a couple weeks ago, for those that have been listening to the podcast or watching on YouTube, all three of our viewers, you will realize that we had Brandon Bonner on, who is a representative of Generation Z, and he brought like a male perspective to it. So I thought, it'd be kind of neat to have a female perspective and talk about some of the same things that Brandon and I sat down and discussed. And basically the conversation is centered around Gen Z. Just basically a lot of this generation is not interested in church and they're walking away from it. So I'm going to share a few things here that are going to basically frame out the conversation. So again, for those that have been listening, Gen Z encompasses kids that have been born from 97 to 2012. So we're talking about today, 12 to like age 26. And so based on the research, current trending says that there will be 35 million people that are disaffiliating with the church by 2050. So just to maintain our current levels, that means that we're going to have to plant 215,000 churches in the next 30 years. And that's just to maintain the status quo, which is continuing to get worse and worse. So your generation is leaving the church in record numbers. And I'm just curious to know what you've seen in your peer group, if you're seeing similar things. Again, this may be an interesting conversation because you attended Lipscomb, which is a Christian university.
Yep.
And now you're at Belmont, also a Christian university.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge statistic. And because it's been researched, it's obviously true. And I know people personally that have left the church or turned off to it, whatever you want to say. Mm-hmm. Most of my friends are believers, go to church regularly. And that is in part due to going to Lipscomb, being at Belmont. Yeah. But Belmont opened it up to it being a lot more different of a demographic. I mean, there are plenty of people in my class that don't go to church regularly. Yeah. Maybe some non-believers that haven't, don't know for sure. But a lot of my friends are believers, and that's great. But I do know people personally that have left and have grown up just like me. So that's interesting. But I think another thing that I've been seeing, and so I have heard a lot of people being turned off to it, leaving the church, but also being in Nashville is an interesting place because a lot of Christian influencers are coming to Nashville like in huge groups, which is interesting. They're leaving California, which is, becoming a lot harder of a place to be a believer. Yeah. And they're coming to Nashville. So that shows like a sense of revival, I feel like. That's probably a mix of like millennials and Gen Z. Yeah. So, and also I don't know if you saw that there was like a revival at Asbury College. Yeah,
I was just reading about that today.
And that's an interesting story. And Auburn University had a revival baptism like a few weeks after that. Right. So I think about that and I'm like, that's super awesome. That's super exciting. And it doesn't take away from the fact that the statistics are true, but I think it just shows that we're in a really integral time with my generation. Yeah. And, we want to be on the side that's like bringing people in and not pushing them away because we know that like they are getting pushed away. Right. So I feel like that's interesting. Like while a lot of people are leaving, a lot of people are being brought in. So it's just interesting to navigate that. But yes, I have friends that have left the church. And I think that's like, a lot of what they say is because of hypocrisy, or they've had a bad interaction happen with someone in their family who's a believer or in the church, or they're maybe just not interested. Yeah. So I've heard all of those common arguments. Yeah.
So let's, you mentioned, the hypocrisy, and I've got down here the 7 main reasons, and I touched on a few of these when I talked to Brandon a few weeks ago. So 29, almost 30% are stating the reason they don't want to be involved in church anymore is they have a hard time believing that a good God would allow so much evil or suffering in the world. Christians are hypocrites, 23%. I believe science refutes too much of the Bible, 20%. 19% says I don't believe in fairy tales. 15% say there are too many injustices in the history of Christianity. 12% say I used to go to church, but it's just not important to me anymore. And then 6% I had a bad experience in church or with a Christian. So those are the 7 top reasons that some surveys with Gen Z have revealed as reasons why they're bailing on Christianity. You mentioned some of your friends leaving. So does any of that resonate with what you've heard?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's only a handful of people that I know personally that have left, but when I've had conversations and trying to, talk about why is this happening or, whatever it is, it usually is those reasons are big. Yeah. And one person has had a tragic event happen in their life. And so I get it. It is confusing. Like, why would God let that happen? Like, I understand, like, it is frustrating. It's confusing. And the thing is, a lot of people have that argument, and then the hypocrisy argument's huge. I feel like that you hear that a lot from people. Yeah. And I was thinking about it in It could be as simple as like maybe you were wanting to go to church, or people who are believers and you're like, you know what, fine, I'll go try a church. But like you show up that day and you worked up the courage and then no one talks to you. And it just proves like, okay, that happened, like they're supposed to be so loving and welcoming, and then nobody welcomed me. And so I feel like it could be as simple as that to, we as Christians have really strong beliefs on things, obviously, because of the Bible, but the way that we handle them is really important.
Yeah.
And I think especially in this generation, like with all the things that happen in the news and politically, there are just so many like heightened viewpoints. And so people get maybe bad views of Christians being hateful. And obviously we know that, we as Christians are sinful and we're imperfect. So things like that are going to come out. We know that's not the true reason, by most people's actions, but I feel like people outside the church or who are already skeptical of it, that just proves their point.
Yeah.
Right.
So, okay, I'm interested to know as we kind of track some of this, because a lot of believers, a lot of church people that have been raised in the church, you've seen it to a small degree, but I've seen it to a pretty large degree as a former campus minister, where we lose a lot of churched people. So we're not even talking about the non-churched. We're talking about people that have grown up in it. They come to college and they're gone. So what? You left. You went to Nashville. You went to a different school. Now, it was a Christian school. Do you attribute any of that to you staying plugged in, or maybe was it the churches you visited? Because I'm assuming you visited around different churches, and maybe you saw something there that continued to like encourage you to stay plugged into church and not just do the skipping out and not being plugged in at all while you were away from home.
Right. Yeah. Lipscomb was a big part of it, and I think I knew that looking for colleges. And I looked at a lot of different colleges, state schools, not, but once I was at Lipscomb, I was like, no, I think this is where I need to be. It's just going to be an encouragement to be around a lot of like-minded people. And so you get there, and it is a lot of people that grew up in the church, but then also, pretty much there are groups of all, there are a lot of Muslim people at Lipscomb. There are some non-believers, which is great, but there are a lot of different groups at Lipscomb, so it's interesting. Yeah. And Lipscomb's growing a lot. But I feel like, I got there and I had some really awesome Bible classes and Bible teachers, and that's kind of what I think about a lot. That helped my faith grow. It just kind of challenged me.
Right.
And I was like, okay, that helped me have a different viewpoint on religion, on my walk with Jesus, and it was all biblical and things that I'd probably even learned before, but it just helped me grow. Like it challenged me to a different extent. And also, meeting people of all different backgrounds, like that was helpful for me and encouraging, and churches for sure. But I feel like whereas I went to college and got stronger in my faith, it was the opposite for some people, because some of the people that went to Lipscomb with me were the ones that left. Yeah.
Well, and that kind of speaks to maybe a root system that may or may not be there. And this is in no way judgmental, because I had a great root system growing up. And when I went to Lipscomb, and I got there, and I would say that my faith was probably weaker than before, and so I was the kid that got there and it was just like, I don't, I can not go to church if I don't want to. And I took advantage of that to a certain degree, and just really wasn't serious about developing my relationship with Christ. And then, the other thing that was interesting to me, and I don't know if you experienced this or not, was that the Bible classes that I had and the Bible reading that I had to do was for a grade. And so I felt like obligated to be in the Bible to just memorize facts and not be in the Bible to improve my relationship with Jesus. Right. And I got kind of burned out on it. And so I wasn't picking up the Bible to read it to be closer. I was reading it to pass a test. Right. And so I think to a certain extent that damaged my faith walk. And that's a really interesting thing for me to look at that situation versus as a campus minister at a state university where kids are coming in and they're reading the Bible not to pass a class or to pass a test, but they truly want to be in the Word. Right. And I see such a spiritual maturity in them that was not there in me at that same age. And I'm wondering if you experienced anything like that.
Yeah, that for sure is hard when it does feel like you have to do these Bible readings for a grade. And there were definitely, especially the first few Bible classes are like that. It's just stuff you've read before. It's that we've read before. Not some people come to college and they hadn't heard the story of Jesus and things like that. So yes, I think that I experienced that with some people I knew. They got there and it was just kind of like, you kind of resented it. And it was, you had the option like, oh, I don't have to go to church. My parents aren't around. But I had a class, what's coming to mind is I had a class junior year of college and it was spiritual disciplines. And that was something that I hadn't talked about a lot at church necessarily, like fasting. You talked about fasting a few weeks ago. But it was fasting, prayer walks, just different forms of prayer than like your typical, I'm going to talk to God, just pretty formal, things like that. But she also emphasized the importance of fasting. So that really helped me, like the different classes like that.
Yeah.
And that helped me grow. But I feel like going to any college, you see both, the people that are going to go away from the Bible and the people that are going to get closer to it. And it kind of, maybe it depended on the group that I was in still, like even in college. And I don't know, I think maybe it has to do with like kind of who your family, like my parents, I didn't ever feel forced to go. I just knew it was important.
Yeah.
And I also felt that it was important. And I feel like some people, they felt maybe just like really it was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like pushing you away, especially if some things are already not going well in your, personal life. And it's like, why would I add that on? Why is that so important to you?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So have you been able to attribute why you stay plugged in? You graduate high school, you go to college, you stay plugged in. Your faith grows actually while you're in college, and you're still a faithful person today. So, statistically speaking, you've beat the odds.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about your experience versus so many others like you that have had the same upbringing, and they didn't? They've left the church. I mean, is there something unique about your holistic spiritual upbringing that maybe is the reason why you're still in church today?
I think for me, looking back on my whole time of growing up here and having my parents and my family, it was just, there were just good connotations of church for me. And I know that's not the experience with everyone, but yeah, it was just always a comfortable thing. And then leaving to go to college, it was something that like, almost, this sounds funny, but that was, everything's changing, but like church wasn't going to change really. Like Jesus wasn't going to change. Mm-hmm. So that was a sense of constancy in my life, which is probably why I stayed with it, especially at first. And it's also like, it's hard to find a church, but also like I knew that on Sunday, that's something I've been doing my whole life. Yeah. My family's doing it. I'm going to do it. And yeah, I think that it probably has a lot to do with my parents, because even when you have like questions about the Bible or different, aspects of religion and spirituality, like my parents were always open to having those conversations, and not even anything crazy, but I feel like we've just always had a very open environment. And so I'm thankful for that, just good role models, but good role models here at church too. And I think that to myself all the time, like why are some people who have had pretty much the exact same upbringing leaving? Yeah. And I don't know. I think some of them, I'm thinking back, like they don't have as close a relationship with their family, or they've had like these really tragic things happen in their life. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I feel like for me, it's just like that was a form of constancy. And now it's just like I need to have hope in something. Like life is hard, and I think I try to explain that to people sometimes, and I'm like, you just need to hope in something. Yeah. And for me, I know Jesus is that, but like, don't you want to have hope that like you're not doing things alone? Like somebody's taking care of you. So
you mentioned like the hypocrisy piece of it, that you had heard that. And I'm thinking about this in terms of, because obviously I can't, the church leaders, we can't fix like the stuff that's going on in families necessarily. Right. Like we don't have control over how a kid is raised, or how mom and dad or a single parent or whatever creates an environment at home that is Jesus focused. So we can't, we can't get in there and do that. But we can control, church leaders can control what the experience is like for a person who may be struggling, who may be outside of the home for the first time and trying to find a church. we can control the type of experience that they have here. So, again, regrounding it back in Generation Z, where we talked a couple weeks ago with Brandon about this idea that your generation is very not as likely to get out there and want to be in groups.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's kind of more isolated, and the technology, goes into that, and just, that whole paradigm that is part of your generation, right? You work up the courage to go and try a church, and you go in there and nobody talks to you. And you're like, this is supposed to be a place where people are welcoming and friendly. And so I went there and I got up the courage and the nerve to go put myself out there, even though it's so far out of my comfort zone. And this is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
I will, I'm not coming back, or I'm not right. And it's a generalization maybe sometimes, is not just that church, but church in general. Why am I going to, and I don't know. I mean, is that something that is part of the 25-year-old way of thinking about things today?
Mm-hmm. I think it is.
Don't want to put words in your mouth, but
it is. And I think a lot of our generation, and you and Brandon touched on this, but I mean, COVID had a lot to do with it. Just everything being virtual, and you didn't have to go, for a while, it's like everything was virtual, so you didn't have to go put yourself out there for a lot of different things. And then maybe not being in person kind of makes it harder to go back in person, and just like social anxiety. And I mean, it's hard. It is hard to go into new groups of people, just for anyone, whether you have, social anxiety or not. You want to say that it is hard. And you can go into a room and be ready to talk, but it's just like, you never know what those dynamics are going to be. And so this generation especially, I think, does have that. Like, definitely being anxious of what social situations will hold. And another thing with the whole virtual aspect, that kind of took away from in person and makes it harder to go back to it, is like with the church piece, something that may have happened with our generation is it takes a lot of work to go to look for a church, or it takes a lot of work to get plugged into a church. Yeah. And if you're just watching one online, it may seem like, okay, that's easy. But then, and while there's a lot of good that came out of that virtual, you're sick, you have to miss for whatever reason, it takes away from the fellowship aspect and like holding each other accountable. Like, we have to come together, and we're called to in the Bible to come together. But I feel like that's hard. That does happen with this generation.
Talk about how important it is for your age group to have an authentic experience in their religion and their spirituality.
It's important. Okay. It's important. And I feel like a lot of what I've seen with our generation, and a lot of why our generation is being turned off by it, is like the legalistic aspect of religion, for sure. All the rules. And I feel like there's been a lot of focus in, the church as a big whole, like not necessarily our church, just like the church, on like, you have to do this, like X, Y, and Z. And it's like, while that is important, those are biblical things. That's not all of it. Like a relationship with Jesus is important. And I think our generation does want the authenticity. And part of that piece to me is just focusing on like the good of the Bible and the good that the church can be. And I think the people that are in the church or coming to it, the attractive piece is like focusing on Jesus, which Jesus does matter. I mean, that's, to me, I feel like that's the most important thing. You form your relationship with him and everything else is falling into place. And obviously salvation comes through him, and we understand that.
Right.
But I think that's big to my generation, is that's why people are turned away from it, if there's a focus on the rules.
Yeah. So how does a church leader, a group of church leaders, how do they navigate that today? Especially, coming from a, I'm going to get in so much trouble for saying this, but let's just say, the traditional, very conservative minded church whose identity is based on these strong-held convictions, doctrinal convictions that can be viewed as legalistic.
Right.
So they want to maintain that, but they also don't want to run people off. They want to be inviting. They want to be welcoming. They want that fellowship to take place, especially with the younger generations, because I mean if we're not keeping the younger generations, what's going to happen to the church?
Right.
You know, it's going to end up folding.
Right.
So how do those churches with that type of worldview, paradigm, you know, view of Scripture, navigate and find common ground there?
Yeah, because it's hard. And there's so much good in that, and everything is biblical, right? Like, we believe that we're doing everything like as close to the Bible as, you know, we can, and that's awesome. But I feel like, you know, that's a hard thing to navigate, and I think about that a lot. Like, what do you do, like, to keep it still biblical but also attractive? And I feel like a lot of it is just, for me, and I feel like I've heard this from people, like, a lot of it is like, just have like the main lessons or the sermons or the Bible classes just be, you know, applicable to your life, like biblical. You know, I guess what I'm trying to say is, sometimes, you know, when you're growing up or whatever it may be, the lessons feel just like a history lesson, which is awesome, because that part of the Bible is awesome too. Yeah. But I think something that's attractive to this generation is just like applicable lessons that are encouraging, and that leads you to Jesus, like leads you to see like Jesus's heart and like how we can be like him. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of it doesn't really change church that much, but I feel like that's attractive to this generation. Yeah.
Because I see your generation, and actually, you know, we can back this up a little bit for the millennial generation and Generation Z and the upcoming Generation Alpha are just really, really searching to fill this void. This something's missing. Parker, pull up that first chart. So those that are watching. This was a massive, very recent study. It included over 23,000 adults age 18 and up, and it included, let's see, India, Canada, Ireland, Malaysia, New Zealand, South Africa, Turkey, the United States. And what they found is 1 in 5 Gen Z women are dealing with self-hurt, suicidal thoughts. And the question was, during the past year, have you ever seriously considered suicide or self-hurt? 21% of Gen Z, and these are females, 17% of Gen Z men have thought about killing themselves, versus millennials at 14% for the females, and it's the same for the guys. That's an interesting thing in the millennial generation, 14% both. But then you see this massive drop off. My generation, Generation X, is 8% for men and women, and then the boomers 3 and 4%, and so that's given us some pretty strong indications that something has changed. There is whatever societal pressures, this need to conform, this need to fit in, and it's leaving this huge gap in a lot of people where they're so anxious and depressed that they're having suicidal thoughts. And I wonder how this plays into our conversation today. When you mentioned needing to go to church and find something that can be taken away and applied to your life right now to fill that void. And so I guess what my question in all of this is the church today responding to that need for your generation? And if so, how? The ones you see that are doing it right, and how not? The ones that, and that may be the majority of churches, that they are not responding the way that they need to respond.
I feel like, yes, the churches that I have seen are responding to it. I mean, it's a hard, first of all, that statistics is sad in this generation that's the case, but I don't, that doesn't surprise me. Because this generation is searching for something, and our generation asks a lot of questions, and especially with all the bad, the evil that's in the world, I think our generation wants answers and wants a way to deal with it. And we know that, Jesus is the answer, but we have to convince them, we have to help them to come to that and believe that. And I feel like a lot of churches have done well, because I feel like even here, the young adult group is huge and the college group is huge, and it's awesome. And other churches that I've seen are doing a really great job of that too. Mm-hmm. And that's encouraging. Yeah. And if you can have someone, we're on the college campus, so you think about that. If you can have someone that you already think is really cool, a great person, and then you find out that, okay, so like they go to church, like they have this faith, that draws people in. So I feel like churches that have really plugged into their young people, I feel like that's super important. Mm-hmm. And I feel like most churches now that I can think of are doing a good job of that. Yeah. Some more than others. I mean, it's hard, especially if it's a smaller church. So I feel like that's a big piece, is just focusing on the young people. Because if you can have someone to encourage you and bring you in, then that's encouraging and that's helpful. So I feel like, yes, churches are doing a good job of responding to it, but it's hard to navigate, especially, mental health and everything. That's hard to navigate. Yeah. Especially because it's hard to tell someone that, prayer or just having, Jesus is just going to help you and fix it, because it doesn't fix it. It's something that someone is really dealing with. Yeah. And there are other things that, my sister's a lot better at talking about this than I am, but there are other things that you really do need if you're dealing with, those really intense mental health struggles. But yeah, I feel like churches are doing a good job of it, especially with having a big young adult population. Yeah. That can help.
So when we go back and we look at some of these reasons why that I mentioned, the 7 top reasons, I'm wondering, because you and I have briefly talked about this offline, with girls, mm-hmm. Specifically, and how much they're influenced with technology and the the advent of the iPhone and just social media apps, Snapchat and Instagram, those kind of things, and just the constant that's your world. Mm-hmm. How much of that may be playing into any and all of this stuff?
I think a lot, because comparison is huge, and that could be how someone looks, what they're doing. They're going on these huge trips. They got into this school. They're dating this person. They're engaged. They're having a baby. That's the stage that I'm in. So that's like what you see a lot of. Yeah. And if you're not in that stage, that's hard. And it's like your whole Instagram feed, and, girls, guys, whatever. But for girls, yeah, it's super hard. And I only have Instagram, but, TikTok, Snapchat, all of that, Instagram, it draws you in. And I feel like it can be encouraging. There are so many good aspects of social media, but it's also discouraging. And I don't know, it could be anything from you don't get as many likes, you don't get as many, hits on whatever post it is, or someone's not answering you back. And, so if you're already feeling discouraged, or, I think it feeds into it.
And I, when I look at that statistic, and there's another one here, this is it's basically how many young women are seriously struggling. The prompt question here is, during the past year, have you ever felt depressed to the point that you felt sad or hopeless almost every day or more than a couple weeks consecutively in a row? And so I don't know if you can see. No, you're not going to be able to see it from here. So for the ladies, for the girls, Gen Z, 41% are dealing with that, versus 31% of men. So still, in your generation, there's a large part of guys are also dealing with this too. But to have 41% of young women, that's a sad thing. Yeah. This is seriously struggling. So this is getting into that depressive state that is just, they're hopeless. Mm-hmm. Versus, and again, this is a contrast now between the generations. Only 26% of Gen X and only 19% of Boomers. So, and that's for the females. So, you're talking about almost double today versus the Boomer generation. And what's the difference there? It's technology certainly wasn't there, right? The iPhone wasn't there, and I just wonder how much of a piece of that is playing into the equation.
I think what comes to mind is Gen Z is in the most formative years of their life right now. So millennials and Gen X, like you're already kind of past those super big points in life. Where in your 20s, I mean, even I can say this because I'm living in it. So much change is happening in who I am, who you are as a person in your mid 20s. Yeah. And even in my core friend group right now, like some of them are married, some of them are engaged, dating, or single. And some of my close friends are even having babies. And it's like all in this really early, So you're trying to figure out those things. You're trying to get a job. You don't really know what your life is going to look like for sure yet. And then I feel like having social media and then you throw in that comparison piece, that leads to like discouragement and, that's hard. And then also with our generation as a whole, I feel like the media and social media shows you really negative parts of the world.
Right, yeah.
Which it does.
And absolutely.
And there's a lot more good in the world than we see.
Right.
And that's something important to remember. But in our generation, you're just like constantly looking. I mean, my Instagram feed shows me things. I'm like, what? Where did that even come from?
Right.
Like, why? I mean, this is terrible, And so I feel like then your algorithm starts showing you more of that.
Yeah.
You saw one video, but it's like a terrible news story. And, so I feel like that's, when you're on these apps, which our generation is heavily on them, you're seeing a lot of the bad in the world. You've got the comparison piece, and it's just like all of this negative energy in your head, and you're already overwhelmed with what your life is going to look like. Yeah. So I feel like that's a big piece, is that this generation is just in super formative years.
Right. And you said a lot of stuff here that is like, we can go down so many, like you said algorithms, like everybody my age or older is like, what? Right. What algorithms? What, but that's a real thing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's like, I don't think that my age understands the nefarious, intentional stuff behind some of these social media apps that pull people in. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of scary when you stop thinking. Here, this is a funny story too. Just thinking about, as you're talking, I'm thinking about my daughter, who's your age. Yep. When she was younger, she had Snapchat, and she was stressed out because she was trying to keep, I don't know how many, like 40 different streaks. Yeah. going, and it was like it was a full-time job for her to keep that going. And so you look at, you're in your 20s and there's a lot of changes going on, like you've mentioned, getting jobs and like maybe starting families. And so you've got all this other stuff. And then like the social media presents like another set of things that you just have to do. It's like, have I checked all these feeds? Have I responded? Have I liked this? Because I'm going to be judged if I don't like my friend's thing. And she's going to be like, well, what,
comment, whatever.
All of this like really bizarre, weird stuff that, like the boomers, they and certainly before them, like the greatest generation, the silent generation, have no idea that this is stuff that you guys are faced with today. Right. Which this last chart, if Parker, pull up this last chart, number 3, young women feeling very stressed. And I get this, Generation Z, 49%. And this is not a little stress. This is like frazzled stress, like the type of stress that only doctors going into surgery should be feeling. It's just crazy amounts of stress. 49%. What's happened? What's going on?
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, because I have experienced the stress piece. I have experienced that. It's just like, it does feel so stressful. And a lot of my friends, you joke about it, you're like, I'm so stressed, but it's a lot of people that really do feel that way. And I don't know, I really feel like social media and technology, and we live in such a busy world. It's always been that way, but now it just feels like there's so much going on and so much you have to keep up with. And for girls specifically, and I don't know, I'm not a guy, so I can't really speak to it, but for girls, it's already starting with my, my younger cousin. She's 12. She's already experienced this. And it happened all the way through my middle and high school experience. And, it kind of tapers off in college, and you just kind of figure out who you are a little bit more, and then now a little bit more. But it's like you see a birthday party that you weren't invited to, or a sleepover. Yeah. Or a group text that you weren't added in. And like to a girl, that's just so stressful. And it's like your friends, and they didn't tell you that was happening. And so like that comes into mind too. And it still kind of happens. Like if you're like, that's why wasn't I invited to that? So I feel like it's just like you're stressed to keep up with social pressures and like, does my life look this way? Like, also, am I doing well at work and school? Like, am I taking care of my family the right way? Like, there's all of that. Like, there's just so much as a woman you have to keep up with.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Not to mention at, those formative ages, you're already insecure.
Right.
You're just like, and for context, and I think for the older listeners here, because they're like, yeah, but I mean, when I was a kid, I wasn't invited to birthday parties. But the difference is that, you weren't invited to the parties, but you're not seeing the pictures of all the fun being posted, for the next 2 weeks.
Right.
And this, like, just in your face kind of, you were excluded and you missed out on something. And that kind of thing is happening every single day. It's it's pervasive. So all of this, I just kind of going back to, as we're having this conversation about technology and all of this stuff, and why Generation Z may not want to be plugged in to church, is it just another thing that they look at as like having to keep up with? Like, this is just another social event, and I know the people that are there, and I know half of them are a bunch of hypocrites, and why do I want to even be exposed to that kind of stuff? Why do I want that additional stress in my life when I'm already stressed enough as it is?
Right. I think yes. And like I said earlier, I feel like it just feels like it's a lot of work. So yeah, why add that on? And if you're telling me I need to do X, Y, and Z from the Bible to, get this salvation you're talking about, or, you want me to work on my faith and, read and pray and, lean into other people and, encourage them, like, it is a lot of work, right? Like, from someone that's outside of it, to them it is.
Yeah.
And also another piece that's like different, but another piece that feels like work is sometimes church, and it does not happen here, but there have been churches that I've gone to that, like, it's exclusive. Like, people, you walk in and like people are in cliques, which is weird. It's like high school.
Yeah.
And so that feels like work to find your group, like at church.
Right.
And yeah, that's already hard for our generation. Yep. And then you're like, well, I mean, do I really need to go and get plugged in with this group of people that they come to, they meet up every Wednesday and they see each other every Sunday, and it's like, they already know each other. Right. It's too much work. Why should I go and try and fit in, So I feel like that's a big piece of it too.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is that what churches ought to be looking at, and if they haven't already done this, they need to do it yesterday, is sitting down and saying, what we need to provide here is an oasis for the, so when people come here, they see this as a,
just like welcoming, comforting,
to get refueled from what your generation is having to endure, rather than create another situation.
Right.
And so I think that's very doable. Mm-hmm. And I think, like you mentioned, there are a lot of churches that are getting on board with that and understanding that's what we need to do. But the catch is, a lot of churches, they get that, but they don't know how to implement something like that. They don't know what that looks like. And I think that's where we're going to have to, church leaders are going to have to lean on your generation, say, help us out here.
Right.
Tell us what this needs to look like. And you've already hit on some of it, the click stuff. Mm-hmm. And if that's your church, and if church leaders are listening, and and I tell you, every church leader, they knows it, that they will know if that exists in their church. Trust me.
Yes.
They need to get rid of that. That's got to be squashed out, because if you want a guaranteed way of having a Gen Z walk in and never walk back in again, they walk out and they never come back. Have that type of
a huge piece.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And not be welcoming.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you think about, like, you may think you've got it covered, like someone is welcoming when you walk in, or, there's usually someone that sees a new person and they'll go up to them, but like, you don't know if that's the one day that, like, no one does go up to that person and welcome them and, tell them of opportunities, these are other people you can meet, introducing them to other people. Sure. And it may be the one day that no one says anything to them. So it's just like, just being intentional about, because it's uncomfortable to walk into a new church. Like, even from the time you open the front door, just is. Like, even if you're on vacation, and you're going with your family, it can be uncomfortable.
It's weird.
Right. Because it's not your home. And so, especially if you don't even have a home church, it's like you really don't know what to expect. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, that's a big piece.
And that speaks to, we haven't talked about it but that kind of speaks to the importance of mentoring
Yeah.
And having relationships, having people that care enough about, and I'm not talking about your age group. I'm talking about like my age group and millennials forming relationships with Gen Z outside of church, so they get to really know that person to a point where it's not as weird to say, hey, come visit church with me. And you're bringing that person in with you versus, a person trying to come in off the street. And because that's what we're supposed to be doing as Christians is going out into the world and forming those relationships. So I want to talk too about these reasons that I've mentioned, current cultural worldviews, entertainment, celebrity influence, educational systems that are out there. I hate to put labels on stuff, but there's a level of indoctrination that's taken place that I've seen. Why is the influence of people that you may not know, like celebrities, overpowering a lot of folks that have been raised in and have relationships with, their own family, people that they actually know, but a celebrity or some influencer on social media is presenting like this is your worldview narrative, this is the doctrine, this is how we approach. So I'm thinking just a lot of the crazy like subjective morality and that kind of stuff. Now it's like your truth is your truth, and that diminishes God, right? Because He is moral absolute,
right?
Why is Gen Z so, I guess, attracted to like going to that? Because everybody else seems to be doing it, and that's what I'm going to do to fit in, kind of stuff. And I thought peer pressure was a thing that was gone, but apparently not.
No, I don't think so. Yeah, there are a lot of different groups and celebrities and things that come to my mind, and that is a confusing thing. Like, why does that happen? I don't know if it's because people have experienced stuff that, maybe in their family or in the church, like we had talked about earlier, and that was negative. So it's like, okay, now I'm searching for something new. And I feel like a lot of the people that I'm thinking of just are not even open to even people they love. They're like, that's awesome. Like, you do it, but I'm over it. That was not good. And so then, you see these celebrities and you're like, that's awesome. Like, so many people are behind that. And like you said, like, speaker and whatever it is, like, it becomes this like super welcoming thing. Like, okay, so I can be a part of like that group. And it's just super like positive and welcoming. And so it feels like a new sense of security, like a new, they find these people that have these new viewpoints.
Yeah.
And you said it earlier, our generation is looking for things. Yeah. And so like, if we don't show that like Jesus is what they're looking for, then they can find it a lot of other places. Yeah. Just other things that fulfill them. Now we know it's not really fulfilling them. Yeah. But to them it is.
Yeah. I'm looking at, so I know more than a few situations where good parents, traditional values, and they raise their child 18 years. They've poured in, they've influenced the child. The child goes, and in 4 short years in college, they have. And I know some rebellion is normal, but in 4 short years, they've taken that 18 years and tossed it out to the point where they will not speak to their parents because they voted one way or another. And it's like, you're the worst human on earth. I cannot have a relationship with you. I'm not even going to talk to you. And I saw that this election cycle, where people who had relationships totally did away with folks that were voting a certain way.
Right.
And, this is like cultivated long-term relationships that have been built. And I don't understand that. I don't think my generation understands that, because like we have this ability to, like, we can completely disagree on stuff and we'll holler at each other and everything, but the next day we're drinking coffee together. But if I did that and your generation was like, I'm done with you. You're dead to me.
Yeah. There are a lot of strong personalities in this generation. Like, that's how I don't understand it either. Is, why can't we all just kind of like disagree and, that's just how
still
we feel.
Be friends.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if we all thought the same anyways, it'd be boring. Yeah. So, and then when it comes to these big ideas, like why can't you just, take it for what it is? We may view differently, but I that happens a lot in this generation with just totally being done with their family.
Which is weird because your generation is the one about tolerance.
Yeah.
Like we need to tolerate, but then it seems like you're not going to tolerate if I don't agree with.
Well, if it's not what I believe, right? Like I'm not going to, right. So it's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
It is all about tolerating and then obviously not.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that social media is a big part of that because maybe it's like you don't even want to say the wrong thing. So you're just like, you're really going all in with a certain belief.
Because the other belief is you're going to get canceled, right? The cancel culture kind of stuff going on. Yeah.
Right.
Which is social suicide.
Right. You don't want that.
Which is that's legitimate. That's something, that's a reason that I can be like, okay, I can understand that.
Yeah.
Because for your generation, it's like, if I don't, the pressure's so strong to conform to whatever cultural standards are there today. If I don't do this, if I don't make a public, and deny people that are not in that, say, no, that's not good. I'm done.
Yeah.
I don't have a life anymore, which is scary.
It is scary. And it's like, to go back to the church piece, it's just frustrating and it's confusing to me because, like, that's not the heart of Jesus. Like, Jesus loves everybody. And then you think about, like, Jesus, like, hung out with all the sinners. Like, we're all sinners together. Like, why, and I wish that more people understood that. Yeah. Like, yes, we have biblical things that we believe.
Right.
But, like, that doesn't mean that there should be this, like, hateful thing, on either end, but like we know that like that's not the intention and heart of Jesus, and I wish like other people knew that. Like I feel like that's a big reason why people are turned away from the church is they feel like there's just like so much hate. Like especially if you do one thing wrong, then they're like, well, there's no point. Like why would I want to be a part of that? Because I'm just doing a lot right now that's not biblical or what my parents are gonna like, so then they just totally aren't interested. And I feel like that's an important piece to try and tell people is like, no, that's just not what Jesus intends at all. Like really, the whole message of the Bible is love.
Right. Yeah.
So I feel like that gets confused a lot too.
Yeah. And it's love God, but love others too.
Right.
And you see that repeated over and over and over again. Yeah. Okay. So I told you this was going to happen.
Right.
Like we went off.
We did.
I have some other stuff here that I would have covered, but we're quickly running out of time. Yes. So we're going to do this. I think just a summary here is a couple things. First of all, churches need to sit down and be, if nothing else, aware of some of the struggles that your generation has that's unique, and be open and understanding to listening to the struggles that you guys have and how churches can respond to that. Second thing I picked up on is, which I like to focus on positive stuff, is there is kind of a revival. So there's this kind of dichotomy that's going, while yes, there's a lot leaving, there's also a lot getting plugged in and having this, I think, recognizing that they need something more that the world is not going to fill, social media isn't going to fill, and that answer is Jesus, which is a super cool thing. The third thing is, we didn't overtly mention this, but maybe it's time that that we look, not just Gen Z, but everybody look at taking a media fast and just, maybe for a week or so, just see what happens. Yeah. There's an interesting study on that too. They did a study, and people were having like literal withdrawal symptoms from after a day without their phone or something. So anyway, consider having a media fast. May be very helpful. Okay, I always like to close out the show with the guest reading a passage of Scripture. It could be their favorite passage or something else. So what do you got for us, Isabel?
All right. This one has stood true for me for a lot of years. It's my favorite. It's a passage, 1 Corinthians 13:4 through the first part of 8. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails.
Yep, that's a good one. All right, folks, if you are wanting to give us feedback, email us at thelionthewayandthewar@gmail.com. If you've got some, and you can see the email address right there on your screen if you are watching. If you've got ideas for a guest, I'm always open to looking at that. As a matter of fact, some of the guests we've had, some of the topics we covered have been because of your feedback. So keep giving us feedback on that. If you're interested in being one of our sponsors, contact us also at that same email address. Speaking of sponsorships, a shout out to Ministry League, who is one of our sponsors. They're, I think, over 100,000 downloads now on their great app. If you're looking for a good resource, consider checking Ministry League out. You can see that their QR codes are there on your screen also. All right, until our next podcast of The Lion, the Way, and the War, love one another. Thank you, Isabel, for reading that scripture. Love one another, be kind to one another, and remember that the Creator of the universe loves you so much that He gave up His only Son for you. Have a blessed day.